everybody. We're back and we're going to be covering Chapter 9 in this lecture. Chapter 9 is going to cover cognitive development in early childhood, 2 to 6 years. Okay, so as you recall from the previous age bracket, Piaget thought that infants were in the sensory motor stage. So from about 0 to 2, children would be placed in that stage. One of the big hallmarks that moves a child out of sensory motor stage and into the next stage is acquiring language. So that's why he had that cutoff point of 2 years of age, because that's the point at which most children start to string together a couple of words. So, okay, now we're into the next stage, which is pre-operational. And in this stage, which is from 2 to about 6 or 7, the child begins to represent the world symbolically, which in this case would be words standing in for objects. So she knows, for example, in that picture that that's a teddy bear, and even if the teddy bear is out of her sight, she can refer to it by its symbolic method, which is to call it a teddy bear. So, all right, so now in the pre-operational stage, they can use symbols. Terrific, but they have some key issues that are going to occur during this stage. All right. Mental representations. That means they're going to be able to hold in their memory things. So, for example, like I said, if that teddy bear is out of sight, that child knows to say, "Teddy bear, where's my teddy bear?" They know to look for their teddy bear. They know that it exists. So, if you recall, during the sensory motor stage, they achieve object permanence, and so one of the key factors in the development of a memory is remembering, knowing that things continue to exist. Why bother remembering them if they don't even necessarily exist from moment to moment, right? They also can learn from their actions and also from their own reflections on their previous actions. So they can learn by doing, and they can learn by thinking about what they have done, thinking about maybe what went wrong or what went right, whether it achieved their goals the last time they tried it or something bad happened, those kinds of things. So they learn from more than one source during this stage, not just the direct feedback that they got in the sensory motor stage, but also from reflecting on previous experience. Okay, so what else happens? I found this funny picture on the internet. What people will do to their pets. I'm sorry if you're the sort of person who dresses your pet up, but this poor cat. So one big achievement of the pre-operational stage is the concept of identity. The idea that even though this cat is currently dressed up as, well, I'm not sure if it's supposed to be a dinosaur eating a cat or if it's supposed to be a cat dressed up as a dinosaur. I'm not sure exactly what that costume is, but one way or another, if a child in this age bracket saw this cat wearing this dinosaur-related costume, they would know that that's still a cat. If it's their cat, they'd know it's still their cat. Even though it looks significantly different, it's still the person, the cat, the thing, whatever it is that they're talking about, but that's stable and that they are always the same thing. Also function. I got a nice picture of a child playing with iPads because parents are just perpetually amazed by how quickly children figure out the function of these electronic devices. The electronic devices are designed perfectly to encourage the recognition of the function of the different buttons and the recognition of how things work in this system. So this child's using an iPad color. And it didn't take this child probably much time to figure out that you dip your finger in the colors on the bottom, and then you rub your finger around on the object, and the function will be that color will get transferred to the object. They figure that out very quickly during the pre-operational stage. They're just sponges for figuring out how things function and how things work. Now, this all sounds like we're making great headway, but of course there are some thinking errors that occur during the pre-operational stage. And for me as a cognitive psychologist, for me the errors are way more interesting than the achievements that the child demonstrates. So let's talk about some of these errors. What you're seeing in this picture right now is a child who is going through what is called the conservation test. So you see in the left top picture, they've shown the child 2 glasses of water that are filled to the same level and said, does this one have more, does this one have more, or do they both have the same amount? And once the child agrees that they both have the same amount, then we move to the second picture. They move the water from one of the glasses into a tall, skinny, so that now the water level is going to be higher. So in the bottom, you see they ask the child again, does this one have more? Does this one have more? Or do they both have the same amount? You see the child picking the tall one. The water level's higher, and so the child is picking the taller one. So that's what is really common during the preoperational stage, is what we call a failure of conservation. The child doesn't realize that the properties of matter are conserved, even if they take on a different shape. So you as an adult know that that's still the same water. It just is being forced into a narrower but taller cylinder. So you wouldn't make this mistake. One of the reasons why preoperational children make this mistake is because they centrate. Piaget calls it centration, when you focus on one dimension and ignore other relevant dimensions. So this child in the bottom picture is focusing on the height. She's centrating on the height of the water and ignoring the other really relevant dimension, which is the width of the water. So by centrating on one dimension and ignoring the others, she makes the error. Another error that children in this stage will make is irreversibility. They don't seem to recognize that all you would have to do is pour that water out of the beaker back into the original glass and they'd look the same again. They can't imagine doing that in their head. If you ask them to imagine it, it's like you've asked them to conjure up aliens or something. They really don't understand what the question is. How can I imagine returning it to the original cup? So they'll stare at you perplexed. If you have access to a child between 2 and 5 is a pretty safe bet that you'll get some of the Piaget conservation errors that are typical of preoperational thinking. If you have the opportunity to test a child, it's really remarkable to watch a child who seems to be so bright and so with it. You're like, man, this kid's really advanced. And then you sit them down and do these tests and you go, oh, they really don't understand how the world works. So they can't imagine just reversing it. They have a tendency to focus on the beginning state and the end state, and they miss. Even though you see in the picture, they show the little girl is just staring raptly at the pouring of the water from the short fat glass into the cylinder. But they seem to not really be processing that. Because, I mean, you can attract the child's attention to it and say, watch me while I pour. And it doesn't seem to bother them that all you did was take this amount of water out of this cup and pour it into this beaker, and suddenly now you believe there's more. But it's because they focus on the end states and not on the transformation. And so during the process of pouring, they kind of get lost. Some additional thinking errors have nothing to do with the conservation tasks. Transductive reasoning is really common during the stage. So here's an example. So they think something like, I was mean to my sister. My sister got sick. I made my sister sick. They have that kind of illogical belief that their thoughts or their behaviors can cause things that are actually independent. A lot of times children whose parents get divorced when the children are in the preoperational stage will use this kind of transductive reasoning to conclude their parents are getting divorced because the child was a bad child. And if only they'd been better, then their parents wouldn't have gotten divorced. This kind of error-laden thinking causes them to leap to the wrong conclusion. And a lot of times they form that conclusion when they are little and they really don't understand how the world works yet. But they kind of carry it with them kind of the rest of their lives, so that in the back of their minds, they still kind of think their parents would be together if they hadn't been such a bad kid. Even though logically, as an adult, they might realize it's different, they still kind of carry those opinions that they formed when they were little throughout their lives. I loaded a video for you that'll illustrate egocentrism, and this little boy does a terrific job of interacting with the Piagetian three-dimensional model that allows a test of egocentrism. Egocentrism is not the kind of narcissistic self-absorption that we often talk about with adults or even with adolescents. What we're talking about with pre-operational children is that they literally think that their perspective is the only perspective. So in this three-dimensional model, this little boy thinks that what he can see is what the person who is sitting on the other side of the mountain can see. Yeah, kids think that if they know something, that everybody must know it. It must be shared knowledge. That if they can hear something, everybody can hear something. If they couldn't hear something, no one can hear it. they have that kind of egocentric way of looking at the world, so that they don't understand their perspective is unique. They haven't developed yet, that theory of mind where they can put themselves into somebody else's perspective. Another typical thinking error is called animism. This is where the child really believes that inanimate objects have desires and hunger and emotions and things that are like a human. So, for example, I got this sequence out of Happy Birthday Moon where the little bear yells out, "It's my birthday," and he hears his echo say, "It's my birthday," and then he comes to the conclusion that he's having a conversation with the moon when it was really his own voice echoing back and forth. So he decides that the moon should get his hat, the bear's hat. So he throws it up on the tree, and he's all excited because look, the moon tries on the hat, right? He likes it. This Happy Birthday Moon really sort of plays or profits on the idea that kids think that inanimate objects have human or at least animate creatures, desires and needs and things like that, and so that they can relate to them. Artificialism is when they think that things that just happen naturally are being caused by someone. So, for example, what makes it rain? Someone turned the hose on. Why is the sky blue? My mommy painted it that way. What causes thunder? The angels are pulling. These are some typical answers. In your project assignment, you have an opportunity, if you know a child who's in this stage, to give them some questions kind of like that, like why is the grass green? Things like that. And sometimes you'll see evidence of artificialism, where they think that the grass is green because it's their favorite color. I've heard that one a lot. It's like that because somebody made it to be like that because they knew I'd like it. That's artificialism. I think natural things are being caused on purpose. Okay. Now, all this stuff makes it sound a little bit like pre-operational children live in some kind of really weird reality, right? I thought it would be fun to take a task that for most of us adults makes us feel a little pre-operational. So we're going to start, and it's kind of hard to just do it with PowerPoints. Normally in class I use like an extension cord and shape the thing that way, but we're going to I tried to make it with the PowerPoints. So we start off with a circle, and it's whatever diameter it is. Okay. Then I'm going to slowly smush that circle. The outside edge is going to stay the same because, like I said, I usually do this with an extension cord in class. And so the outside's going to stay the same as I squish the circle into an ellipse. So I'm going to do this little process. Okay, so I've squished it. So now I took the outside, I squished it down. The outside is still the same length. Now we've got a new shape. Now it's an ellipse. Okay. Here's your question. Is the area of the circle the same as the area of the ellipse? So in class, I usually make my students get out their I like to use a response thing called Socratic, where you can get out your phone and you can vote using that anonymously, and that way people can be more honest. And so is the area of the circle the same as the area of the ellipse? Now, if you know anything about geometry, this might not be a very hard question for you. But if you have a rough grasp of geometry, you might be thinking to yourself, well, the outside stayed the same, so the area must be, because isn't the area of something determined by the outside of something? Let's make it a slightly simpler problem. Scoot you guys out of the way, and let's say instead of a circle, let's use a square that's made up of 4 1-unit squares. So we've got 2 units per side, 4 units. So this is a 4 square unit, so it's 4 squares. Let's mock up the ellipse with a rectangle. So now we've got 1 unit by 3 units. Now, you guys probably know your simple calculation of an area well enough to realize that the one on the left has an area of 4 and the one on the right has an area of 3, even though the outside edges are the same, right? If we go on the square, just count the outside edges. We've got 2 units per side. That's 8 edges, right? There's 8 units of edge. If we look at the one on the right, the rectangle, we've got 1 unit for the verticals, 2 units for the verticals, plus 6 total units for the horizontals, that's 8 too. It's got the same outside, but it's got a different area. So now suddenly the answer to the circle versus ellipse becomes a lot clearer. You probably had a feeling that the ellipse probably needed to be smaller. But what makes a pre-operational child so clearly pre-operational is that they are unable to explain their reasoning even when they're right. Even when they're right, they say, the water is the same. You say, well, how do you know? Which is the key question from Piaget's perspective. A pre-operational child will not really know why. Well, because you poured it in there. Well, yeah, I poured it in there, so why is it still the same? Well, because they are the same. They just really can't explain it. And a lot of times that's how we feel in the circle versus ellipse situation. We're like, the ellipse has a smaller area. Well, how do you know? Now, if you have it memorized and you know the calculation, that's really easy for you to say. But if you don't know the calculation, you're like, well, because it looks like less. Well, but the outsides are the same, so how do you know it's less? I've lost my ability to explain it. I'm not sure, right? And that's what happens when, for the little kid, they are not sure how to explain things. The beauty for us adults is that all we have to do is take one step back and get concrete about it, and then we can solve the problem. For the pre-operational child, they can't get concrete. If we try to explain it to them, it's like we feel when somebody's trying to explain to us that the circle is like square and the square is and the ellipse is like a rectangle, and so look, it's the same thing. And I don't understand what you're telling me. That's how the child feels, and so it can't really teach them faster the principles of conservation. They can't pick it up. Now, there are some complaints about Piaget's interpretations of the conservation test and how pre-operational children tend to fail it. He assumed that the errors that the children were displaying had to be because they didn't understand how the world works, so their logic was faulty. But one really big complaint about people who have tested children between 2 and especially 4 is their language shortcomings. I mean, they really can't explain what they're trying to say. Maybe not because they don't understand, but because they don't have the right words for it. And so we have to figure out some other way of testing that would allow us to accommodate their limited language while still testing the concept. It's a tricky thing because it's hard to test little kids. As they get a little older, past 4, they start to become a little bit easier to test. So we're not exactly sure how faulty the 2-year-old's logic is. All we know is that they can't explain their reasoning very well. We can reduce egocentrism, or what appears to be egocentric responses in children, by providing them with familiar material rather than examples that we've pulled out of unfamiliar materials that they've never seen before. So if we use examples like them talking to their mother instead of them talking to a stranger in the research lab, or if we use cartoon characters that they know versus something that we've made up, those kinds of things, the kids appear a little less that egocentrism where they think that everybody else knows what they know and see what they can see. But there still is egocentrism. That there's no questioning that Piaget was correct, that kids during this stage are egocentric, but it seems to wane a little younger than he thought it did. So by about 5, kids are starting to be able to take on someone else's perspective. All right, well, here's Freud. Let's talk a little bit about moral development. He looks like he has some chastising to do, I think. So Freud, of course, is the founder of psychoanalytic theory, and he said that parents try to control the child's id demands. And hopefully you recall way back to chapter 2 that the id, it's chapter 1, chapter 2, that the id is the source of all of our unconscious aggression and sexual impulses, those kinds of things, and basically, the pleasure principle. And so parents try to control children from just operating on the pleasure principle all the time, just doing whatever they want, whenever they want. This action parents take to try and help kids to control their demands actually helps them to ultimately develop superego, because parents give messages about what's right, what's wrong, and what's good and what's bad. And kids, it takes a long time, but they ultimately internalize that. Um, One of the things that parents find super frustrating is that you have to repeat the lessons frequently. You can't do a one-shot training session with a 4-year-old and now they know the principle. You have to repeat the same lesson over and over again. We don't eat cookies before dinner. We don't eat cookies before dinner. We don't eat cookies before dinner. We write over and over until it ultimately gets internalized. A cognitive learning theory, I don't have a single person to just sort of highlight here. Cognitive learning theory says that we learn morality, what is right and wrong, through observational learning and modeling. But one of the things they point out is that, unfortunately, deviant models are more powerful than good models. So a lot of times when we turn our children over to watch, let's say, my gosh, what is that show called where the lead character is really an aardvark? I almost had it. I want to say like Alfred. Getting response competition. I want to say Hey Arnold. Oh my gosh. So it's a PBS show. You guys probably all watched it when you were children. And it's always got a moral. You're supposed to learn by the end how to behave correctly because some character had something bad happen to them. And at the end, we find out that good things come from following the rules or being nice to other people or whatever. When my daughter was little, she was watching that show. There was a new kid in class, or one of the characters got glasses. I can't remember which scenario it is. Either the new kid came with glasses or an existing kid got glasses. And the children were teasing the kid for having glasses and calling him Four Eyes and other kinds of things. And by the end of the show, you're supposed to empathize with the child who's wearing glasses and realize you should call people names. So I thought it was a fine show. I watched it with my daughter. Okay, well, not long afterwards, we were over at a friend's house, and one of the girls came in crying and said that Sierra had been calling them Four Eyes. And you know what? I don't think the little girl even had glasses on. Sierra was just saying it. My daughter was just saying it. And I realized she had focused in on what the bad kid was doing and hadn't really gotten the ultimate message that you're supposed to do in the long run, the nice thing, right? A lot of times we turn our kids over to watch things. We don't necessarily explain it fully, and we don't realize that it's sometimes more attractive to focus in on what the deviant model is doing. So, for example, Cruella de Vil gets a lot of attention compared to, the nice family and the nanny and nice dogs. Scar versus, Simba or Mufasa or Nala, or Jafar versus Aladdin, right? A lot of times the behaviors of the deviant models, I'm not saying, oh, I want to be Jafar. I'm saying instead, oftentimes kids pick up ways to do stuff that is not desirable from watching the deviant models. So cognitive learning theory says that we want to try and make sure that try and pick out models that are primarily pro-social, that are doing things that we would like our children to imitate. And second, we want to make sure that when our children take in this kind of information, that we talk about what was wrong with that behavior, or why, even if they had gotten caught, that would be a bad thing to do, or things like that. And so that children understand the larger picture. Because kids between 2 and 6 who are watching these kinds of programs oftentimes pay attention only during certain times, and they're playing with other things or really just not paying attention some of the times. And so we have to kind of attract their attention to the messages we want them to get. Now, Piaget said about morality that, just like he says about everything about child development, that the child actively develops morality, that they're seeking to find out what's right and what's wrong. So he says that the child acts on and modifies the world, receives feedback about the appropriateness of their behavior, and then that serves to modify their behavior for the future and helps to form their moral attitudes. And so through this interaction with the environment and feedback from other people and things like that, they start to develop different levels of morality. Heteronomous morality is what we would expect children at the pre-operational stage to be. These are kids who really think that moral rules are rigid and unchanging. If it's wrong in one circumstance, it's wrong in another circumstance. If it's wrong for one person, it's wrong for another person. And the rules are the rules, and that's it. Uh, One of the things that keeps kids on the straight and narrow in this stage of development is that because adults have power and authority over children, children obey and they do what they're told simply because they're the children and the adult is the adult, not because they recognize that the rules are good or right, or that this is a desirable behavior and that's an undesirable behavior, but literally because the adults are powerful and the children are not. Children do what the adults want. So it's really important that the adults provide good role models for their children, that they provide good moral choices for their children, so that the kids can learn from the powerful adult that this is the right way to behave. The adult behaves this way. The adult expects me to behave this way. That helps them make good moral choices over time. So kids during this stage are just completely dependent on the outside influences. We're going to come back to Piaget's second stage of moral development a little later in childhood. Now, Piaget's student, Kohlberg, said that we climb up a ladder of more and more complex moral decision making. So here I have a kid who mom made a bunch of cookies and they're going to go to the bake sale tonight. Mom has gone upstairs to get dressed and has told her son, those cookies are for the bake sale tonight, so don't eat them. Okay, they're cooling and then we're going to go to the bake sale. And he seems to want one, right? Kohlberg says that kids who are in the pre-operational stage of development are at the same time at the pre-conventional level of morality. Pre-conventional means that they don't yet understand the conventions, that is the rules, the laws. They don't understand why those are the rules or the laws. So really, they're only motivated by one of two things. In stage one of the pre-conventional level, they don't want to get punished. So if they do the right thing, it's solely because they don't want to get caught punished. If they do the wrong thing, it's because they think there's a low probability that they're going to get caught. So if this child knows how long it takes mom to get dressed, and he knows if he scarfs down this cookie, she's not even going to know. And maybe he moves them around on the little tray to make it really, hard to tell that one's missing. He might feel like, I'm going to do the wrong thing because I don't think I'm going to get punished anyway. I'm never going to get caught. So initially, children are motivated by just solely trying to avoid punishment. Then they move to the next stage, which is where they start to, in addition to not wanting to be punished, they also want to maybe try and get rewards whenever they can. So maybe he's going to resist eating the cookies now, so that when his mom comes downstairs and sees what a good boy he's been, she's going to give him a cookie. Right? And then he gets the reward that way. He's done the right thing, and he gets rewarded for it. Simultaneously, he avoids getting punished, so he doesn't do the wrong thing. So it's kind of like a double-edged benefit if he holds off. But he's not holding off because he knows that it's wrong to eat the cookies that are intended to be sold at the bake sale. He's holding off because he doesn't want to get punished, or he's hoping to get rewarded. So that's the pre-conventional level. Now, as we get into later childhood, we'll talk about the conventional, and then hopefully get to post-conventional level someday in our adulthood. All right, I'm going to take, I think this is a good place to stop on this lecture, and we'll come back and I'll pick up intelligence.